All right, welcome in everyone to the deep dive. Today, we're going to tackle, I think, a pretty fascinating, certainly a massive topic. We're diving into the Indian education system.
Okay.
We've got a whole bunch of sources here, kind of looking at, everything from how it's structured, what works well, what doesn't work so well, and of course, this big change with this NEP 2020, this new education policy. And yeah, I guess our goal here is really to just kind of boil it all down, give you, the listener, like the core pieces so you can really understand, right, like where things stand today, where they might be headed.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a huge system, right? It affects so many people.
Right.
And I think just to get oriented, it helps to remember like the different levels we're talking about. You've got that primary school, right?
Right.
Classes 1 to 5,
Right.
then middle school 6 to 8, secondary 9 and 10, higher secondary 11 and 12,
Yeah.
and then of course all of the higher ed, right?
Right.
Undergraduate,
Got it.
postgraduate.
Yeah, and it's not like one thing, right? It's not like one monolithic system. There are all these different boards, right? You've got the CBSE, ICSE, all the different state boards. You've got these international boards coming in, IB, Cambridge. It's a lot.
It really is. It's a very diverse landscape,
Yeah.
and each of those boards, operates with its own curriculum, its own kind of emphasis.
Right.
And then, you layer on top of that, like you said, that NEP 2020, which is this pretty significant shift, really signaling this move towards skill-based learning,
Yeah.
which is, a big departure from how things have traditionally been done in some cases.
Okay. So, I think we've got our bearings now. Let's dive in. Let's start with like the good stuff, right? Like
Yeah.
what are the advantages, like the core strengths of how Indian education works today?
Well, I think one of the things that comes up again and again, right, is this really strong foundation. In theory, theoretical knowledge,
Mhm.
particularly in maths and science. A lot of the sources really underscore this very rigorous kind of academic training, particularly early on.
Yeah. And I mean, you see that playing out, right? Like globally. I mean, the number of Indian professionals who are making, huge contributions in engineering and medicine and tech especially.
Right.
I mean, it seems like that theoretical underpinning is really key.
Yeah. Historically, the Indian education system, particularly in the sciences, has, to really drill down on those concepts from early grades, sometimes focusing on like first principles, really getting that deep understanding. And, sometimes that's been criticized, right,
Mm.
for maybe lacking immediate application. But it's given, generations of students this really powerful analytical framework, which has contributed, I think, enormously to their success, worldwide in these really competitive fields.
Yeah, that's a really good point about that tension, right, between theory and application.
Mm.
Something else that comes up a lot is the relative affordability,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Especially if we're talking about government-run institutions.
Right.
That opens up education to a much broader swath of the population, at least up to a certain point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, access is crucial, right? And the government's role in providing affordable primary and secondary education is huge.
Hmm.
And you also can't ignore the global reputation, right, of some of these top-tier institutions, the IITs, the IIMs.
Yeah.
I mean, these are world-renowned,
Yeah.
real benchmarks of quality, right, within the system.
Totally. They're magnets for talent. They drive a lot of innovation. Now, if we kind of zoom out a little bit and look at the broader culture, right? There seems to be this real deep-seated importance placed on education within families. You often see, a huge commitment from parents, right? Both in terms of time and resources to their children's learning.
Yeah, it's a powerful factor. Education is really culturally valued,
Mm.
right? And that drive for achievement can be a huge advantage. And then you've got this sheer variety,
Yeah.
right, of educational pathways that are available now. It's not just the traditional kind of science, commerce, arts streams.
Right, right. And I think what's particularly interesting is this increasing emphasis and availability of these vocational skill-based training programs.
Yeah.
That diversification is essential, right, for reaching a wider range of talents, for preparing students for, this increasingly diverse job market. It's about, creating more avenues, more routes to success.
Exactly. And we can't ignore, I think, the transformative impact, right, of this expanding digital education sector. Platforms like BYG US, Unacademy, these have become household names. And then government initiatives like Diksha, Swayam, these are also playing a vital role in making these really high quality resources more available, even to those in more remote areas. So technology is really democratizing access in a big way.
So we've talked about, some real strengths, but let's be real, no system is perfect. Where does the Indian education system, typically fall short? What are the big challenges that it faces?
I think one of the most common critiques, right, you hear this over and over again, is this over-reliance on rote learning, memorizing facts and figures rather than really understanding, really being able to apply those
Okay.
concepts
Yeah.
critically. A lot of the sources point this out.
Yeah. It feels like it's often more about, reproducing information on a test rather than, actually internalizing it, understanding it.
Right.
And that feeds into, I think, this really intense, this pressure cooker environment for students, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The competition. I mean, the level of competition for, board exams and these really high stakes entrance exams, the JG, the NEET, the UPSC exams,
Right.
it's a major concern. The pressure is immense. It can have a real impact, right, on students' mental health, this relentless pursuit of marks.
Yeah. It's a really intense period for
Wow.
a lot of young people, and this focus on these make or break exams
Yeah.
can sometimes, kind of eclipse, right? The inherent value of learning, the joy of learning.
Yeah.
Another thing that seems to be a recurring theme is this gap, right, between the the theory that's taught and practical hands-on learning in a lot of institutions.
Yeah, absolutely. There's often this disconnect, right, between what's happening in the classroom, the theoretical knowledge,
Yeah.
and then what's actually needed, right,
Yep.
out there in the professional world, the practical skills.
Mm-hmm.
And that can leave graduates feeling underprepared.
Right. And then this issue of teacher quality and often, very high student-teacher ratios, especially in government schools,
Yeah.
that seems to be a persistent challenge. These overcrowded classrooms and a shortage of well-trained educators, it really makes it hard, right, to give that personalized attention, that really effective instruction. It's tough on everyone.
Yeah, it's a systemic challenge,
Yeah.
and it needs real investment. And,
Yeah.
and kind of related to that bigger picture is the issue of outdated curriculum, right, in a lot of institutions. What's being taught isn't always aligned with the current needs of industry.
Right. Which obviously then impacts, employability. I
Exactly.
mean, the global economy is changing so fast. Education has to be agile. It has to be relevant. And we can't ignore this urban-rural divide, right, when it comes to access.
Yeah, the disparity in infrastructure, resources,
Yeah.
just basic things like reliable electricity, internet access. Even the teaching methods themselves can vary pretty dramatically between urban and rural areas.
Yeah.
It creates this real imbalance and opportunity right from the start.
Yeah. And finally, while primary and secondary education might be relatively affordable, the cost of higher education, especially for these professional courses, can still be a really significant barrier for, a lot of talented students.
Absolutely, that financial burden pursuing those more specialized degrees in engineering, medicine, management, it can really limit access despite, academic potential.
Okay, so we've identified some serious areas needing attention. Let's turn to potential solutions, and specifically this NEP 2020, this new education policy. What are the key reforms that this is aiming to bring about?
Well, there are some really fundamental structural changes. One of the most obvious is this shift to a 5+3+3+4 structure for schooling,
Right.
which puts a lot more emphasis and resources into early childhood education, recognizing, how crucial that is.
Yeah, that's a pretty big shift from that traditional 10+2 model, right, that we're all used to.
Yeah.
And there's this real push towards multidisciplinary learning as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The policy is aiming to give students a lot more flexibility, right, in choosing subjects across these different traditional streams.
Hmm.
Those really rigid boundaries between science, commerce, and arts, the idea is to make those much more permeable.
Yeah.
So you could potentially, combine physics with history or economics with biology.
Yeah, that's interesting. It seems like that could lead to a much more, well-rounded, adaptable kind of learner. And there's a big emphasis on integrating skill-based learning, vocational training much earlier, right?
Yeah, that's a core objective. The idea is to equip students with those practical skills right alongside the theoretical knowledge.
Yeah.
Making them, more employable, making education more relevant to what the workforce actually needs. And there's also this push to change how exams are conducted, moving away from just rote memorization toward really assessing, right, conceptual understanding, application.
Yeah, that would be a really welcome change, I think, from that very exam-centric culture that we talked about. It would hopefully incentivize, right, deeper learning rather than just
Yeah.
cramming. And then for students going into higher ed, there's that increased flexibility in degree programs, these multiple entry and exit options.
Yeah, the idea that you can, leave a program at various stages with a certificate, a diploma, a full degree gives a lot more flexibility, recognizes different levels of educational attainment, individual circumstances.
So these sound like, really positive, potentially transformative changes on paper. But as we touched on before, the real test is going to be, implementing these things effectively.
Exactly. The success of this policy hinges on how well it's actually executed, right, across this massive, diverse educational landscape. It's going to require a lot of adaptation, a lot of commitment from schools, colleges, universities across the country.
And that adaptation will probably require, some pretty serious support and resources
Right.
in a few key areas, right?
For sure. Better teacher training is crucial. Equipping educators with the skills to actually implement these new approaches, upgrading infrastructure, especially in those rural areas we talked about, and maybe most importantly, a real shift in mindset among educators, students, parents, really valuing skills, critical thinking, genuine understanding over just chasing marks.
So, given these challenges and the ambitious goals of NEP 2020, what are some, practical paths forward? How can we keep improving the system?
Well, I think we need to keep working on reducing that laser focus on just academic marks, cultivating creativity, problem-solving practical skills, fostering a real love of learning, not just for the exam, but for its own sake.
Yeah. And it seems like technology has such a huge role to play here, right? Making learning more interactive, engaging, more accessible, really blending, right, those digital tools with what happens in the classroom.
Absolutely. And investing in teacher training, ongoing comprehensive training, is non-negotiable.
Yeah.
We need to give educators the resources, the ongoing support that they need to really facilitate this shift.
And I think better career counseling, guidance services within schools is essential. So many students are making these huge decisions about their future with surprisingly little awareness of what's out there.
Totally. Giving them better information, personalized guidance, exposing them to different fields, that can make a huge difference. And finally, I think collaboration between the governments, the private sector, civil society, that's key to tackling those disparities we talked about, particularly in rural areas, ensuring that everyone has access to quality education.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's clear the Indian education system has these really strong foundations, this emphasis on theoretical knowledge, the strong cultural value placed on education. But it also faces some really serious challenges, this rote learning, the exam pressure, these inequalities.
Yeah, and NEP 2020, it's a bold attempt, right, to address some of those really deep-rooted issues. This focus on skills, multidisciplinary approaches, more flexibility. The key is going to be how effectively it's implemented. That's going to take real commitment.
Yeah. It gives us a lot to think about. It offers this really comprehensive framework for rethinking education in India. And that brings us to our final thought for you, the listener. Thinking about everything we've discussed today, what single initiative, what one focused change do you think would have the biggest positive impact on the Indian education system in the years to come? And what role, if any, do you see yourself or your community playing in that evolution?
That's a great question, one for everyone to really consider.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the Indian education system. We hope you found it valuable.